All right. There we are, everybody. So we are recording this for the Canadian Network for Imagination and Creativity, and my name's Alexis Milligan. I'm going to hand this over to our host, and you're going to have to bear with us just briefly while I just do a slight technical event here. Just 1 second, and then I'll pass it off to Jessica.
Hi, everyone. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce myself while we're getting everything set up for the chat that we're going to have. Thank you again for coming and joining us this evening. I really have a interesting talk, I think, for us this evening. I've asked Alexis to have sort of a nature walk playing for us. You'll be able to hear the sounds of the nature. You as well will be able to feel as though you're going on a walk through the forest as we open up for this chat. So my name is Jessica Sokolowski. I am a part-time professor at the University of Ottawa, and I work with teacher candidates in the ICI cohort. I as well am a PhD candidate and will be defending early next year to complete my program. I'm also an elementary teacher with the CDSBO School Board. So thank you so much for being with me. And again, I hope that you're in a comfortable space, that you are relaxed, and let's get going. I walk along barefoot on the earth, feeling the cold, soft grass beneath me. I walk slowly, without urgency, both to a destination and again without any destination at all. I feel the cool fall breeze brush against my sun-kissed skin and close my eyes, breathing deeply and steadily. Amidst the chaos of our everyday lives, I have found a space of solace and comfort. A space to think and reflect, a place of peace. I see the colors of the leaves are starting to change as they let go and give in to transformation. Soon they will be bare and vulnerable. Soon they will embrace the cruelness of winter, only to survive and emerge even stronger come spring. I feel a soft rain slowly trickle down from a looming sky. I long to feel fulfilled as I once did. I crave an artistic outlet and want to break free from the confines of my own mind. What happened to me? Did I settle for the expectation, the mundane within reach that could be possible? Did I grow up and become who I thought the world wanted me to be? Is there a compromise? Since I can remember, I have been in love with fiction. Works such as Alice in Wonderland and the Chronicles of Narnia sparked something within me that I just cannot explain. As I got older, I found my place in the theater, living other people's lives through their narratives. I've always had a strong connection to the arts, in particular theater, and as an extension, creative writing. As I got older and life got busier, I always assumed that I was infusing creativity into my classroom, because I teach through an arts-based perspective and I encourage experiential learning. What I've come to realize in light of our new reality is that I engage with creativity in the arts, not as a way to connect with myself, but as a way to cope with the chaos. Our lives are so busy, but do we take the time to prioritize what feeds our souls? Are we just going through the motions of the day? What happens when you disconnect and engage purposefully and meaningfully within the space around you? For me, I feel so alive when I'm in the forest. I can disconnect with the outside world and just connect with myself. I feel most creative when the skies are dark and the day is dreary. There's something about the rain that just allows my creative side to come alive. As an adult, I still get lost in fiction, whether it be in a book or a podcast, and sometimes in those creative spaces, the boundaries between fact and fiction blur. I get so lost in my own thoughts as I walk through the forest or write in the rain. When do you feel most connected and creative? In the midst of chaos, how do you silence the noise? So to open our conversation, I have a quick passage from this little book that I've been reading called The Little Book of Being by Diana Winston. It is very small, but I want to read this, and then I would like to open the conversation to speak to you about how you engage with creativity in your own life amidst the busyness of our day, how we come into ourselves through artistic practices, and what that does, not just for ourselves as teachers or in our professional lives, but what it does for us as people. So this is called a notion analogy, and I really like this, and I really want you to sit with these ideas as you take this journey with me through this beautiful forest soundscape. So imagine your mind is like an ocean. On the surface of the ocean, there's choppy waves and turbulence. This is the drama that we get caught in: thoughts, fears, emotions, and stories. Now, an ocean may have a choppy surface, but imagine sinking below the surface into the infinite depth below. Deep in an ocean is a boundless stillness that is completely undisturbed by the turbulence above. Can you connect with this deep tranquility? And with that, I'm going to conclude my portion. Thank you so much for bearing with me for that storytelling. I'm looking forward to opening up the floor and to hear your thoughts on how you come into yourself and how you engage with creativity in your daily life.
That's great. Thanks for that. Just noticed that it jumped to an ad when I was off contemplating, and then it jumped to an ad. So I'm sorry for that. I was so close. It was so close to being so slick. That's a great provocation for us this evening, Jessica. So does anyone have any thoughts? Maybe we're just sitting in our thoughts before we begin, but great. I've got Fred, and then I've got Michael.
Is it possible to share a brief poem fragment? I would have to be made a co-host.
Oh, I see. It actually will only let me make you a full host, and then that doesn't.
And then I have to pass it back?
Yes. So is there any way to share a link in the chat that we could open?
Well, the provocation was what creative elements drive us in the chaos, and I actually found poetry as one of mine. And so I had this poem fragment that starts as a sight poem so that you kind of had to see it. Maybe I'll just read briefly from it. You can picture with your imaginations that the text is like a rolling wave. And for us in BC, waves and water right now are a very present dread and complication to the lives of everybody on the West Coast here. So let me just quickly jump over. The poem I entitled Found in a Hanging Basket. Life is a torrent of immediacy, a flood of gotta-dos, should-dos looming. I am swept along, bouncing from task to task, need to need, the unending struggle's purpose to breathe, to survive, desperately surfacing for little gasps in stillness in the garden. I found myself losing myself in a hanging basket, my heartful, headless rush damned in time, in space, in attitude. I found myself losing myself in a hanging basket. Enraptured, I turned in this peaceful eddy, finally seeing a riot of textures, a spectrum of colors, a cascade of heights, a vibrancy of life, the promise of spring, the gentleness of summer, the richness of harvest, the creative art of combining. I found myself losing myself in a hanging basket, its biodiversity diverting me into this peaceful pool. A gentle breeze turned creation of wonder to pause me in my striving to ponder. I stand in awe as I wander, captured in the floral enthusiasm, in the tonal flow of color, in the artful current of texture, in the varied origins of growth, in the welcoming joy of naming. And then it goes on from there, and I have some fun with the language, and it just lifted my spirits and went on for a while. Next thing I know, I'm writing about community, which is a strength and a core. And I find a lot of my poetry will start off maybe in a dark place, but end up in hope and in community. It's a very common theme. Over to Michael.
Michael or Jessica, actually, I think you want to follow up on that.
Yes, I'm so sorry about that. I wrote in the chat, I'm curious. Fred, did you write that?
Yes.
Oh my, honestly, I hung on to every word. It was completely relevant. And 100%, I feel synergy with that. I definitely, I hung on to every word of that poem. That was so beautiful. Thank you so much.
Hmm.
I was in a master's cohort at SFU, and I had done some reading about Carl Lego and Lynn Fells, who was here a couple of times ago. And she did a 200-page dissertation that was a poem. And she even said that she took her field notes in poetry. And I thought, what? I'm a mathematician, but it just spoke to me. And so I found that that was one way that I can crystallize and center myself, like you said in your nature walk poem yourself.
Thank you so much.
Michael?
Well, Jess, you had me as soon as I saw the pathway in the woods and moving along the road. You had me. I bought into everything you wanted to say just with those images. It was very captivating. And of course, it brings back all of the magical elements that nature can provide for us, soothing our souls regardless of what the practical reality is around us. And so I bought everything that you said, but it was the combination of what you said in the context of that nature walk. It was almost stronger that we didn't see you and we only heard you as an overlay dialogue to us walking down that road. Very, very effective. You said one phrase and one image that really struck me, and you said, "My mind is like the ocean." And so all of those images of the relationship between mind and mood and feeling and the characteristics of water and the ocean in particular struck me as being particularly vivid. So the examples, both of you and what both you and Fred said, the magic that you escape with is through poetry. Well, of course, we can escape through poetry and any of the arts, all of the arts, where we can see our souls fed rather directly. And I think you hinted at that and thereby kind of answered what your question was in your original statement about what this idea jam is going to be all about. So congratulations, you hooked me. I bought right in on that first image of that nature walk.
Thank you so much, Michael. I really appreciate that.
Just everyone thinking about those things as we sort of ponder and contemplate. It's been interesting that one of the things that I have found a lot of solace in is my garden, and I didn't really realize that was going to become such a creative outlet. And the things that I'm having fun with, much to my neighbor's chagrin, that I've let my front yard become a wildflower pasture, just a big old field. And I've had the city called on me and all the rest of it, and that's been fine. But what I've really enjoyed is creating pathways, which is what first came as we were looking at that video. Is I ordered myself a real fancy whippersnipper, battery operated, look out. Oh, it's like I get my boots on, here I go. And I've been creating these paths through my front yard, this not very large square plot of land, but like little fairy paths, I've been calling them. And what's been amazing is the kids in the neighborhood want to come over to just run the paths. And I started to make them a bit of a maze with little dead ends and little loops, and you could pass around here and go around this way. And then I did one down to the backyard, and it was just this idea of pathways and not necessarily knowing what path you're on or where it will bring you. And I found myself really contemplating a lot of that this year, about where do our pathways take us and where they branch off and then where they reconnect and intersect again, which I found really comforting in a way, which has been slightly fascinating. So that was the first thing that came to my mind watching those paths. was thinking about making them and making my own in a way.
Alexis, can I add a further prompt? As you were speaking, I was thinking, in terms of just the way that our lives have shifted, I want to further ask how you've learned so much about yourself and everyone who has shared so far. So this was the whole purpose. When you're busy with all the noise and running to kids' activities and, teaching and all the different things that we do, I'm curious, when you had time to slow down and really connect with yourself, what did you learn about yourself? Did you learn that you were putting these creative outlets on a back burner? Did you learn that you were just filling all of your space and leaving no time for these things? Did you learn that you never really wanted to do all these things anyway, and you were just doing them, why? Out of necessity or because you think you have to? I want to ask you, when you slowed down and the things you felt that you had to do no longer became necessary, what did you learn about yourself?
That's a good one. Anyone? What are you thinking? It's a good thing to be confronted with, to articulate it. Any thoughts, anyone? Yeah, Goran.
Hi, I'd like to reflect on that. Yeah, thank you all so much for sharing so beautifully, and what wonderful stories, and somehow so inviting and evocative. I completely agree with Michael. The poetry and is just so effective, and somehow the video of walking through those woods is so beautiful. And it really connects, I think, for me with what you were talking about, Jessica, initially, how you kind of introduced this to us and your invitation to us around stillness. And somehow, for me, that stillness connected with your experience, Alexis, around creating paths. There is something about this walking and path making that's connected with this notion of stillness. And sort of building on your wonderful question, Jessica, I wonder, whether something that at least I feel I've learned about myself is that, that freedom that we give to ourselves to go on a little walk, on a little exploratory journey, on something that can sort of cover a new path is almost always, at least for me, somehow connected with this idea of stillness, of relaxation, of not kind of yearning for something or trying to achieve something, but rather just kind of allowing it to unfold and allowing the path to almost present itself. So it's a really kind of curious and wonderful sort of juxtaposition of these different ideas that seem to be connected in a way that I can't say I've really considered before. So I really kind of appreciate how you all have shared and put these elements together. It's really interesting.
Anyone else? Have a little bit of contemplation there about a lot of that, like you say, Jessica, it's almost like patterns, right? Those patterns that we feel like we're stuck in, and then finding time to sort of break or release some of those patterns. Blaine.
Well, I thoroughly enjoyed the walk, not having had an opportunity to do much of that in nature this fall. I really enjoyed that walk down, for me, memory lane. I certainly enjoyed the poetry because I find that's also a bit of an avenue for me in terms of creative output. But a couple of other things that I find really restful and peaceful and quiet is woodworking. And I do a fair amount of that. I particularly like to make, in much the vein of Thomas Halliburton's The Clockmaker, I like to make shaker clocks and give them away as wedding gifts and special gifts to friends and relatives, that kind of thing. And then I also like to, as many of us here gathered, I like to write. I like Jessica's point on fiction. I have been a fan of fiction all of my life, and I like writing, and I like scholarly writing, but I also like what I call escape writing, which is fictional. So there are a number of things that I like to do, and I find in those places I don't have to be somewhere to find peace or solace. I just have to allow myself the opportunity to engage in the things that bring me joy and happiness.
Jessica, any thoughts on that?
I really love that you mentioned woodworking. Blaine, thank you. I know that you're in North Bay. I'm actually from North Bay. I think we had this conversation at one of the conferences that we were at. I love North Bay, and I think that that is where the attachment to the forest comes from. When we first entered the call, I was all excited. My internet got upgraded. Usually when we have these meetings, I have to keep my camera off because I do live in the forest purposefully, because it does bring that sense of nostalgia, that sense of home. That connection to that space that brings about creativity and brings about calmness, stillness, all the things we've been talking about. The woodworking, my neighbor has a woodworking shop. He builds custom kitchens and he has this huge shop. Anyhow, I'm always just amazed at the intricacies that goes into the artwork of wood making, only because when we think of visual arts, we think of visual arts in a classroom. I'm sure visual artists would have other thoughts, so I apologize about my narrow view of visual arts, but I'm always amazed when I see woodworking or sculptures that are created from ice, for example. So anyways, I just love that woodworking, and learning so much about everyone through this conversation, that woodworking is one of your passions, because I can definitely see how that would be something that would be calming and artistic.
Indeed, it is.
Hmm.
Thanks, Jessica.
It's also interesting when we're sort of confronted with those challenges, you know, in our pursuit of that creativity, or those places of joy and those moments of frustration where you can't necessarily let go of those things as you engage in the activity. So there was, you know, how those tasks and the lists and the things that kind of have that weight on you, how they appear when you're in doing the thing that you want to bring you joy. They just kind of evade from the side sometimes, which is really interesting. Anyone have any thoughts on that, in terms of where you're finding those moments of joy and maybe escape, but how are they coming to you as well? Yeah, Goran.
I'll just very briefly reflect on that as a yes answer, which you talked about, Blaine, because I love how you said, you know, that you don't necessarily think of kind of having to go somewhere, that it's more about sort of allowing yourself to do things that bring you joy. And I find that so wonderful and instructive, you know, at a time when, you know, it feels as if we're kind of prompted to think of external things, of having to move somewhere or go somewhere or do something, which could be fun. It's just that I also appreciate this other side, you know, sort of having the liberty of going in to explore what is it that one would actually really love to do, and then just engaging with that. And there seems to be a kind of an openness to that creates these spaces of creativity that you talk about, Alexis. So I really find it wonderful. Thank you.
Goran, just to build off what you've said, I'm also curious. I love this. We've kind of moved the conversation towards joy. I'm curious, in those times that are less joyful, in those times that perhaps are challenging, where can we seek creativity as solace in those areas? Where are we finding these moments of stillness? I feel as though I've done so much reflecting over the last 2 years, as I'm sure you all have. So I just felt like it was so important to open up and have this conversation about not only the things that we've learned about ourselves, but also the new ways that we approach not just joy, but how do we sort of assist ourselves when we're in spaces that are less joyful? And I know this is going to sound super silly. I live in the forest. I never quite noticed or maybe paid attention before to the sky, just looking up at the sky. Now everything's just dialed back and is a little slower. And I feel like making time for something just as simple as being outside and looking up into the night sky and seeing all the stars. And I can reflect on when I was a child and you had all the time in the world, right? There were no activities to run to, no classes to teach, no marking to do. And you would just, you know, lay on the hillside in North Bay, because that's where I grew up, and just look at these beautiful stars. And then, you know, think about all the star stories and make the connections. And same with moving clouds. So just these elements around us, the reconnection that I've had, not just with nature, but with the simplicity, even the simplicity of relationships. Think about the way that we interact with colleagues, peers, friends. We don't need to feel the need to, you know, we're going to go and meet and do this. The simplicity of the way that we interact with one another. There's just, I think, in times of darkness, when it seems like things aren't going so excellent, when we see the glass half full, you can see that there were all of these beautiful opportunities that we never took before.
Yeah, Stan.
It's interesting. So talking about joy and creativity, like, I mean, quite often I get caught in that place of I don't necessarily see everything for the creative value that it is, right? So last Friday, for instance, we've just moved into a new house, and I don't do well with boxes and stuff everywhere. Like, that doesn't do well for me. So we've now in a week went from moving across the city to 40 minutes away from where we were. If you came into our house, you'd never know we moved like 2 weeks ago, because everything's hung up. It's a little bit of a mess in here, but ignore this part, right? So one of the last things I wanted to get done was Christmas lights, right? Well, of course, the house that we were in before, I knew what I was doing there, right? So it wasn't much creative work there. I know what I'm doing. It's the same setup every year. And, so I come out here, and so we go to Canadian Tire, and as we planned everything. Like, I don't like things to be kind of all over the place. So we planned all of this out, but not really. So by the time we got to Canadian Tire and actually did the math on how much lights we would have to buy, that's like a car payment, a house payment, and like a bank loan refinancing just to do Christmas lights, right? So because of how I am with work, everything's regimented. Left Canadian Tire is really miserable. Like, I'm talking miserable. Like, Christmas is done. We're not putting up trees. We're not doing anything. You can see my wife shaking her head agreeing, like Christmas was over for everybody. So came home, thought about it a little bit, and then decided, you know what, we do have lights. Let's see what we can do, right? And it's a new house, new design. Well, in that moment of step by step, so as we're talking about creativity, and as I cancel out a lot of what I think is not creative for me, we managed to totally do up our house with everything that we have in a new way, to the point where for the night that we set it up and turned it on, neighbors are stopping and people are kind of taking pictures out front. And it's like, you know what? Sometimes that's as simple as where creativity comes from in a moment of unjoy, right? Is that as I stood there in my garage and looked at the pile of what I thought was junk Christmas lights, like, I think we even managed to only throw out 1 or 2 sets that didn't work, and everything worked. So by the end, as I stood there looking at this, and like our house flashes and sings, like, we are going to annoy the hell out of the neighbors here, right? Like, if they were worried about us before, they really need to be worried. But that brought joy. That brought joy out of it. That was done, right? So sometimes too, like, I find it's cyclical, right? Like, we've all been trapped in our houses for so long, right? And even though the world is opening up, there's the inconvenience of having to show your COVID stuff and pull out your driver's license, and not like you get used to it, but it's those little things where how much more can we take before you break? But I think what we need to do, and what I'm learning to see more and more is that you're not always necessarily looking for that stamped creative things. Sometimes that walk through the forest where you can do the same path 20 different times, right? Like, we live along the Ottawa River now, very close to it. And I've seen the Ottawa River from pretty much every angle. And after a while of living in the city, you kind of ignore it. But every morning that I hit that one intersection where I live, and it's like, wow, that's beautiful. I can't wait for what it looks like in spring, or what it looks like then, which gets your head thinking and your heart connected. And that's where your creativity out of a negative place can come, is taking a different view of the same thing and shifting your mindset. So let me add that into the mix a little bit.
Stan, I really love that you have mentioned taking the same view and shifting your mindset of something. But I want to go back for a second and talk about the boxes. For me, chaos is represented in different ways. When you hear the word chaos, you potentially are thinking noise and, something that is put in motion that maybe is creating all kinds of noise is probably the best word. I'm sorry. But chaos also comes across in different ways. And Stan, I'm like you, the boxes, that would be chaos for me. It would stress me right out having all these boxes. And so it's so fascinating hearing you talk that first and foremost, you were trying, I can only imagine the stress. If you had those boxes done in 2 weeks, I can only imagine the stress of doing that. And so something beautiful, you looked for a creative outlet. Okay, so I don't think it was just about the Christmas lights. You're unpacking all of these things. And that was something that was creative. You had to get that creativeness out of you and, intricately putting up the lights and the whole experience of the lights. And thank you for sharing your frustrations as well, because I'm learning as well that I want to take joy potentially out of the equation just because it is in times of challenge that we grow. We've talked about this before, right? But just Stan's example was so excellent. He's having this chaos, and I can totally picture my husband saying that Christmas is canceled, like we're not doing this. I was laughing as you were saying that. And then you reflect and think, wait a minute, but I love Christmas lights and I love putting up the Christmas lights. I love the hot chocolate. I love all of these things that go along, right? That create the nostalgia for you. So anyway, sorry, that was my 2 cents. I love that you've put up your Christmas lights. And I just want to put out to everyone else, the chaos doesn't have to be shuffling to activities and, children fighting over things that, seemingly are meaningless. It can be chaos as simple as, boxes sitting around or something, a task that, it's simple that you could just get off your plate, but you're choosing not to do it. And so it's interesting how we inject these creative moments. That's what I mean by cope. How do we take these spaces and sort of remove ourselves, just disconnect, even for a little bit, just so you can reconnect with yourself. And I imagine, Stan, that you probably as well had such a great time putting up those lights as much as you complained about it.
It did end up at the end of the day, by the time I'm up there climbing around on my roof, being frustrated with life and everything else, as things started to come together, it's like unpacking the house, right? You start with a level of chaos. And we didn't plan to move, like even with that, we really didn't plan to move the way we did. We moved one room at a time. Take a kid's bedroom, move that over, set it up. Take a living room, move it over, so that by the end of a week, you're there. Well, half of my friends showed up on Monday, said, grab all your crap and you're moving now. So that by the end of the day, literally, like they just left every room full of stuff. So for somebody who lives in an order, then that's chaos. Like that's madness to my head. And it was never ending. So part of our creative journey with the house is how do we take years of crap that we should have gone through before we moved, of course, but yeah, you didn't, right? And then find a home for it so that you're removing, you're placing, but you're creating a new art form. We're in a place we've never been, so things have to be different than they were, right? So as this was going on, I learned a lot about myself that week, right? And about my family and about, managing, like I worked for a school board too. So I was trying to still manage work while unpacking a house. Well, you get really good at being able to see things beyond what the immediate point is. So as I'm looking at my garage, that was wall to wall stuff, trying to figure out how am I storing a motorcycle and a car and all of this? How am I going to creatively put this to the order that it needs to be in? But then in the end, when you look at it, and it's not just simply a job well done. And we've all been in those places where you actually have a moment of appreciation for what you've created out of disorder, right? Where when you shift that mindset to go, okay, rather than this is a never-ending, overwhelming task, how do I make art out of this? And in my job, I explained that to my cleaning staff too. Like if you take a look at any custodian you've ever seen, right? See dirt, clean it. Seems pretty black and white, right? But how you'd clean a wall is different than how somebody else will, or how somebody would wipe a window. So we tell them, make this an art, right? How that teacher wants to see the classroom the next day. Some care, some don't, but you do it for you. Make it safe, make it clean, but you take that, what appears to be a mundane job, and turn it into an art. Well, when you start to do that with the staff and you change their mindset about, well, I'm not cleaning up after 30 kids and a teacher who doesn't care, you're creating a learning space for them that's clean and healthy. Yeah, we get a whole bunch of different output from people because they start to realize that they're part of a bigger system, not just somebody who shows up like the Keebler elves at the end of the night, right? So this is part of how we moved, and dealing with the Christmas lights was shift that mindset. Don't look at this as a negative attribute. Somebody's got to do this, so it may as well be me. Look at it as, what an opportunity it is to do this again or do this fresh and then jump right into it, right? Like grab a hold of that creative nature and take it and run with it. My 2 cents, or a lot of sense in that game.
And Natasha's going to follow up with that.
Sorry, trying to unmute and make sure that we're close enough but far enough away that we don't have that terrible feedback. Yeah, and it's really interesting because the first time we moved, our kids were significantly younger. And it's funny how the boxes to Stan were chaos, but to him, they were a complete canvas. I mean, he had little drawings. He would spend hours coloring and drawing on the boxes. And I really wish I had kept more of them, but you know, and I mean like little tiny things. So it's funny how what one person sees as chaos, another person sees as an empty blank canvas. And, you know, I think to also talk about changing the mindset, sometimes it's something as simple as rather than saying I have to, saying I get to, right? Because usually the have tos are those things you don't want to do, right? Like I hate doing dishes. And the worst part is when I'm in the middle of doing dishes, my husband likes to come in and throw a dish and tell me I need to do more dishes. But anyway, he really is a wonderful person. And yes, the house is very nice. And I do thank him for that. But so I hate to do it. So when you sit there and say, I have to do dishes versus something usually that you want to do, you say, I get to. So it's that I get to do dishes, right? And like somebody once explained it, you know, like you think about the bubbles and the warmth in your hands and, you know, and it's like, okay, I still hate to do them. But, you know, it's just that little mindset change and that thinking that sometimes it's that simple. But not always that easy to do.
Well, we get into those patterns and those routines, right? And those are really, really tough to break. And those creative moments, those moments of finding that creativity. It's so interesting just talking about boxes because I had the chance to work on a production at the Shaw Festival called, we did a production of The Magician's Nephew, which is part of C.S. Lewis's series, the first one, well, the prequel. And we actually decided in the design of the show that we would make everything out of cardboard boxes because we wanted the children in the audience of equal adult children to play with their imaginations in how we were using boxes, and something like the cardboard box being anything that our imagination can dream it to be. And that does that idea of the mindset and the imagination and how we get stuck into those, you know, in those patterns and those relationships where, you know, our story, the narrative, our perspective on how we're seeing ourselves and other people in our stories and all those things is, you know, something like a cardboard box can be taken in many different ways, as the dishes, as the packing, as the lights, right? Very interesting. Anyone else have any thoughts? Some really interesting reflections this evening. Brad.
Sorry, I was about to type it. I got behind. I wanted to thank Natasha for her thought because I remember a couple of winters ago having to shovel the sidewalks at church. And as I'm doing that, all of a sudden I looked at the slopes coming off of the roadway down into the lot. And I thought, oh, we could make some. Next thing I know, I sent out a Facebook thing saying, hey, anybody want to come and play at the church? And all of a sudden the labor that I was doing became an art form and a joy. And a single mom and a couple of their kids came and we played for hours in the snow. And instead of doing the labor of clearing the sidewalks because it was a chore, it became a joy and a creative expression. Thank you.
Games, we love games, don't we? It's so critical. But I keep referencing, Fred, last year we were talking about the face parabolas, that exercise, doing the parabolas with, and I keep referencing that in different conversations that I have, because again, it's turning it into a personal experience, and that opportunity to make it into something fun and engage in a new way. And you take something that's mundane and turn that into something that you actually create a personal connection with. And then you get all these memories, and then you get all these stories, and then you get that time when we all went to the church and we were all together and playing. And then we have, so the legacy of those opportunities too, right? That they stay with us, and then they transform us and become part of our history and part of our story. So interesting. Anyone have any other thoughts? We've got some great book titles in the chat that have just come up. Angela was suggesting Not a Box and Not a Stick by Antoinette Portis.
I can speak a little bit to that.
Yeah.
I use them in my classroom as a way of getting my primary junior teacher candidates to think about, yes, they have very low or no budgets to work with in their classroom, but that's not an excuse for not doing visual art. And so these two books were, I think one of them got a fairly significant award for children's literature as well. But they're very simply drawn, but what's beautiful about them, it's a bunny, rabbit, and a pig are the main characters in the book, but they're just line drawings, and the colors of the pages where the child is engaging with the stick or the box in a creative way are all in color. But then there's another voice that comes in every second page that says, what are you doing with that stick? Or be careful with that stick. Or, the whole idea of you're going to put your eye out with that and taking these materials away from children because of the safety hazards, whereas this child didn't see it that way. They saw it as a vehicle for creativity. So really simple books, but I highly recommend them if you're working with children or teacher candidates and want to inspire them in simple ways.
Thanks, Angela. Yes, Michael.
Thanks, Alexis. I'm drawn by the references people have made tonight about play. So I want to get naked with you now for a moment. I want to admit that I play. We all do. But most of the time our play, because we're adults and we live in a culture that suggests that our adult behavior has to be covert when we think no one else is looking, unlike children who play overtly with great abandon. Well, I admit I cross the border a little bit sometimes. I'm going to give you an example. You may think it's frivolous, but in fact, I think it's deeper than frivolous. If it isn't, I'm finished. Have you noticed that automobiles have personalities? Have you noticed that? Big SUVs are bullies, and people driving little cars are meek and, defensive. And I drive a lot, and I have to go to Toronto a lot, and I did before the pandemic, and I drove on 401 a lot to get there. And I too have a huge SUV. It's a Honda Fit. Well, it was big, but I took it into a car wash one day, and afterwards it shrank. So it's now the little Honda Fit that it is. And I'm very sensitive to being bullied by all these SUVs who get in front of me in traffic lines, and they just think they own the road because they're all driving a big vehicle. So if any of you have something like a Ford Explorer or something like that, I'm talking about you. Anyway, as revenge, I play out in my mind that I'm not driving a Honda Fit at all. Oh no, I'm driving an intercity bus. Yeah, get out of my way. Especially a Trailways intercity bus. I don't know why Trailways, it's just a company I knew about in the States at one time. Obviously not Greyhound, they've abandoned Canadians now. So I imagine when I'm driving my little Honda Fit between Ottawa and Toronto, that I'm not driving a Honda Fit, but I'm actually driving this enormous 16-wheeler intercity bus with a full complement of passengers. And actually, my driving style on the highway changes because I'm driving this bus. None of these SUVs can challenge me. I won't move over a lane just because they want to go by. And so I play it. It's a bit like Walter Mitty, you know, who plays being the captain of the ocean liner when his car is stuck in traffic. And I admit that actually Walter Mitty is a perfect example. I admit to having Walter Mitty sickness. I admit that I play, and it's sometimes overt. How many of you will admit that you do the same with whatever examples you have? Because I know you do.
Michael, I'm going to just quickly, I'm going to jump in for 17 seconds because I'm more interested to see what other people's ideas are. But as you were talking, I was thinking, who else is guilty of being in a vehicle and when certain music comes on, right? Or if it's raining, you picture yourself being in a movie. And okay, thank you, Alexis, because I never grew out of that. Sometimes it's quite dramatic, or sometimes I'm exhausted by the time I get to the university because I literally have put on a full Broadway show in the car. Okay, thank you. So it's not just me. I'm going to hand it over. I think Blaine has his hand up, Alexis.
Absolutely, Jess, absolutely.
All right, Blaine, confessions.
I just had to laugh the whole way through what Michael was saying, you know, because I've driven the 401 many times, the 400 more, but the 401, and from Barrie on into Toronto, it's crazy. It's madness, you know, this kind of thing. But I find myself, rather than imagining that I'm driving a different vehicle, I find myself imagining that I'm actually a driver education instructor. And and I find myself talking to these other vehicles so as they're making one move or another, you know. And I said to my wife one time that when I retire, when that day ever comes, I said, I'm going to go to the OPP and get a license to be able to travel up and down the highway, particularly the 401, issuing tickets for people that have a major default in their vehicles. In other words, their signal lights just absolutely don't work, and they keep changing lanes without. And I find myself giving them instructions as to when they should have turned them on, when they should have turned them off, and how. Anyway, you just reminded me of that. That's it's a good thing that they're probably not hearing the instructions that I'm giving them, but nevertheless, there you have it.
Blaine, I love it. I know you understand.
Yes, I do. I do.
Oh, fantastic. Stan, confessions.
Okay, so Michael, you raised a good one. It's funny what you don't think of, right? So you're looking at SUVs as bullies. Less than 5 hours ago, I just traded in a 5-liter Mustang convertible, right? Which, yeah, you want to talk about a bully of a vehicle, picture something that can pass you so fast you can't think straight, right? Well, we traded that in on a Ford Edge. Well, all of a sudden I went from being something on the road to everything else. Like for the first time in 6 years we've owned a car like that, I got scared on the road. It's like, oh, nobody's getting out of my way. Like all of a sudden so I have to start looking at my Edge as a transport truck because I like that. That's shifting the mindset, because back in the day, I would have looked at a car like that and went, yeah, you just the air I'm going to move past you should move you out of my way, right? But again, it's shifting that mindset. So I like that, right? Honda Fit as a bus, I'm driving my Edge like it's a transport truck. See, learn something new every time we come to this, right?
There's more understanding here than I thought.
Well, that's why we had so much fun going out to UBC when we were being blown by those Mustangs on the highway stretch just before UBC. And we had this little flat black Datsun 1000. You know, we would do great in traffic, but as soon as we hit the open stretch, we were toast. But just thinking about, you know, some vet bullying us beside us, and then we pull on extra cross straps, a helmet, and the turbine starts to wind up and the car starts to vibrate. That was a way of using story to put ourselves in a different mindset as we were being bullied, as you said, Michael. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great, Fred. Exactly. Absolutely. Exactly.
All right, we're coming into our last 5 minutes. So any last thoughts? I know it just disappears, the time. It's any sort of last moments of reflection as such? I used to drive my bike around Toronto thinking I was in the Tour de France. That's my confession. I was like, and I could be way faster than all those couriers. Like, I'm just telling you.
Alexis, I did prepare a small passage,
Great.
excuse me, that I wanted to just
Excellent.
share, I guess, to kind of end. I didn't want to jump in because I'm not sure if anyone else has any thoughts.
Any last thoughts? We'll hand it over to you, Jessica.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to say, first of all, thank you so much for bearing with me. These are just lots of thoughts that I've been working through, but as well, on top of my arts-based practice with my students, and obviously we're all, for those of us who are educators, are extremely passionate, whether in the arts or whatever have you. And I know for myself, I've added to my practice as well, really focusing on meaningful learning. And I've always looked at experiential learning, but I've shifted a bit into more meaningful learning. And I've always talked about getting to know students, the student narrative, et cetera. But more so now focusing on the student themselves, what they are getting out of this, how they are engaging with the material, the creative moments that they're finding. And so I'm going to leave you with a small passage that I wrote with you, and I hope that you find reflection in this. So when you leave this meeting, I want you to close your eyes and go outside of your home. Listen carefully. What do you notice about your sense of sound? Is it heightened? Do you notice sounds that feel unfamiliar in a familiar environment? Walk around and let that sound guide you. What do you feel? Are you drawn to anything in particular? Do you find yourself with a sense of renewed curiosity about a space that you frequent each day? Now open your eyes, but cover your ears. Continue to walk around your space. What do you notice now? How has the environment changed? How have your feelings toward it changed? As you walk, retrace your steps to where you first began and make note of the things around you. How are they different? Let yourself focus on the experience of the moment. Notice the details of the elements. What season is it? What green spaces exist? Finally, cover your ears and close your eyes. Keep walking. You know where you are. Why do you feel hesitation? Are you nervous or even afraid, walking without guidance or a sense of direction? Challenge yourself and begin to run. Slow at first, and then pick up the speed. Have you opened your eyes yet? If you have, think about why that is. Thank you so much for coming tonight.
Thank you so much, Jessica. That was just so fantastic. Thank you for all of those moments and points of reflection and, those things that we often don't give ourselves permission to think about. I am just looking up really quickly because I want to make sure that I've got it straight. We've got our next idea jam, which is coming up. I just want to make sure I've got the title for next month ready to go. And that will be December 16th. We've got Jillian Judson, who's out west. And Jillian's going to take us through engaging imagination and engaging emotion and the role of feeling. So how we connect with feeling in our creativity. So thanks everyone for coming to this evening's Idea Jam. And we really hope that we are going to see you next month and have a great month. Thanks again, Jessica. Thanks everyone to the steering committee, and we will see you soon.